People in the diner froze. Forks paused in midair. Coffee cups clinked quietly back onto saucers. No one dared say a word. A tall, sharp-suited man, clearly someone important, stood up from his corner booth with tears in his eyes. His wallet had been untouched, his food cold, but his gaze was fixed on one thing. A waitress kneeling beside his daughter, carefully spoon-feeding her mashed potatoes like she was the only person in the world. His daughter, Emma, was 8. She had a rare condition that made it hard for her to move or speak. That day, she'd been slouched in her wheelchair, head drooping, too tired to lift her arms. Until the waitress came. He watched silently as the young woman knelt on the greasy diner floor without hesitation, feeding Emma gently, patiently, even smiling as Emma drooled and struggled to chew. Not once did she flinch or rush. Not once did she look around to see who was watching. And the millionaire single dad? He was watching every second, jaw clenched, emotions swirling in his chest like a storm. Then, without a word, he walked straight up to the waitress. What he said next changed her life forever. But nobody in that diner, not even her, could have guessed what would happen just 24 hours later. 2 days earlier, it was just another morning in West Haven, Connecticut. Rain tapped gently against the diner's windows. The sky was gray, and the old heater under the counter clanked with every breath. Inside, the smell of pancakes and bacon filled the air. "Order up, Tasha," barked Frank, the cook, sliding 2 plates onto the warming shelf. Tasha wiped her hands on her apron and hurried over. She had dark curls tied back in a puff and skin like honey. Her shoes squeaked as she rushed from one end of the diner to the other. She'd been working doubles all week. Bills were late. Her car had been making a strange sound, and her landlord had left a voicemail that made her stomach twist. But Tasha smiled. She always smiled, because even though life had never been easy for her, she knew what it meant to fight, to hope, and to serve people with kindness, even when it felt like the world had forgotten her. She dropped off the pancakes at table 3, filled a coffee at table 5, and was halfway through wiping table 6 when she noticed a man walk in with a little girl in a wheelchair. He didn't look like he belonged there. Expensive suit, gold cufflinks, watch that probably cost more than her car. But it was the girl that caught Tasha's attention. Emma, tiny, fragile, and slumped over. Her arms were stiff, her head leaned to the side, and her big brown eyes stared out at nothing. She looked exhausted. Her breathing was shallow. Tasha's chest tightened. She'd seen enough pain in her own life to recognize it in others. Something told her this little girl had been through a lot. The man, her father probably, guided the wheelchair to the corner booth and sat down. He didn't even glance at the menu. He just stared at his daughter with worry on his face. Tasha grabbed a notepad and made her way over. "Hi there, I'm Tasha. I'll be taking care of you today," she said gently, her eyes flicking between the man and the girl. "Can I get you started with anything?" The man didn't look up. "Just water," he muttered. Tasha turned to Emma. "And for the little lady?" The man looked at his daughter like the question was too much to handle. She can't eat on her own," he said softly. "I'll try to feed her when the food comes." Tasha nodded and smiled warmly. "No worries. Take your time." She walked back to the kitchen, but her mind stayed on the little girl. A few minutes later, Tasha returned with a small plate of mashed potatoes and soft vegetables. She figured it would be easier for the girl to swallow than a burger or pancakes. But when she arrived, she saw the man on the phone, clearly stressed. He was whispering sharply into the receiver, pinching the bridge of his nose. Emma sat motionless, her plate untouched. Tasha hesitated for a moment, then made a choice. She bent down beside the wheelchair, picked up the spoon, and softly said, "Mind if I help you, sweetheart?" Emma didn't say anything. Her eyes just fluttered slightly. Tasha scooped a tiny bit of potato and gently brought it to the girl's lips. Emma opened her mouth slowly, like it took all the energy she had, and accepted the bite. Tasha smiled. "That's it, baby girl. You're doing great." She continued feeding Emma while the man stayed on the phone, unaware. Tasha didn't care if anyone was watching. She wasn't doing it for attention. She just couldn't stand the thought of that little girl sitting there hungry. As she fed Emma, a strange calm came over her, like she was meant to be there in that moment. But when she finally looked up, she realized the man was no longer on the phone. He was standing across the table, watching her with a look she couldn't quite read. Part disbelief, part something else, something deeper. That moment, right there, was the one that would flip Tasha's world upside down. But she didn't know it yet. Back in the kitchen, Frank yelled again. "Tasha, you taking a nap out there?" "Coming," she called, standing quickly and wiping her hands. But just as she turned to walk away from the booth, she heard a voice behind her. "Wait." It was the man. She turned slowly. "What's your name again?" he asked, voice quiet, but firm. "Tasha." He looked her dead in the eye. "Don't go anywhere." Then he pulled out his phone. She blinked. "Sir." But he was already walking out the door, phone to his ear. Tasha stood there, confused, staring after him. Who was this man? She didn't know yet, but she was about to find out. And nothing in her life would ever be the same again. That night, she closed the diner at 10 p.m. Her feet ached, her back screamed, but she was used to pain. She stepped out into the cool night air, heading to her rusty old Honda. She started the engine, well, she tried to. Click, 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 dead. "No, no, no," she whispered, resting her forehead on the steering wheel. It had finally given out. She sat there for a moment, fighting tears. Then she looked up and saw something that didn't make sense. A black SUV was parked across the street, running, headlights on. It had been there when she'd clocked out. Suddenly, the passenger window rolled down, and from inside, a voice called out, "Tasha." Her heart jumped. She squinted into the dark. It was the same man from earlier. She stood up, cautiously walking toward the curb. What are you doing here?" she asked. "I told you not to go anywhere," he said simply. Her eyes widened. He reached over and opened the passenger door. "Get in." Tasha froze. This was crazy. She didn't even know his name. But something in his voice, in his eyes, told her this wasn't a threat. This was the start of something big. She took a breath and stepped inside. Tasha sat stiffly in the plush leather seat, the door clicking shut beside her with a sound she wasn't used to. Everything about the SUV screamed money. Smooth, spotless, smelling faintly of leather and something expensive she couldn't name. The man didn't speak at first. He just stared out the windshield, hands gripping the steering wheel like he was still thinking it over. Finally, he turned to her. "My name is Daniel Walker," he said. "I own a few companies. Real estate, tech, logistics. Nothing too exciting." Tasha blinked slowly. That name, it rang a bell. She wasn't one to follow rich people or business news, but she'd heard that name on TV before. Or maybe the radio. A story about the richest single dad on the East Coast? She couldn't remember exactly. Daniel continued. "I wasn't supposed to be at that diner today. My usual meeting got canceled, and I thought Emma might enjoy a small place for lunch." He paused again, his voice tight. "She hasn't been eating at all. She barely talks. Her doctors say it's normal with her condition. But they also said she might not get better." He turned his head and looked directly at Tasha. "Then today, I watched her eat 3 full bites with you. That's the most she's eaten in days." Tasha looked down at her hands. She was hungry. She just needed a little help. "No," he said. "She needed you." Tasha felt her heart skip. Daniel reached into the side pocket of the door and pulled out a business card. It was black with gold lettering, thick as a credit card. He handed it to her. "I want you to come work for me," he said. Tasha blinked. "Doing what?" He looked at her like it was obvious. "Taking care of Emma." Tasha felt her mouth go dry. "Mr. Walker, I'm just a waitress. I'm not trained for something like that." He shook his head. "You have something no amount of training can teach. Compassion, patience. My daughter responded to you in a way I haven't seen since her mom passed." Tasha's heart ached at the quiet pain in his voice. I don't want a nurse, he said. I have 10 of those. I want you. Emma wants you. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. Tasha looked out the window at the diner, glowing faintly behind them. Her life was there, her problems, her routines, her dreams, slowly withering. And in this car was something completely different. A chance. Maybe even a miracle. She turned back to him. What's the catch? She asked quietly. He smiled just a little. No catch, but you'll need to move in. At least part-time. I'll pay you well. Better than anything the diner gives. Tasha opened her mouth, then closed it. Can I think about it? Daniel nodded. Of course, but not for too long. He handed her a small folder. My assistant put together a few things. Details. You can call or text me anytime. She nodded slowly, stepping out of the SUV. Rain had started falling again, misting her face. He rolled down the window one last time before driving off. Thank you for feeding my daughter. Then he was gone. The next morning, Tasha sat at her tiny kitchen table with the folder open in front of her. Inside were documents, some about Emma's condition, some about salary and job responsibilities, and a handwritten note. She smiled after you left, for the first time in months. Daniel. Tasha touched the note gently, her fingers trembling. She didn't have much in life. Her mom had passed when she was 17. Her little brother had gotten caught up in some trouble down south. She hadn't gone to college, had no savings, no one depending on her, except maybe, now, Emma. Her phone buzzed. It was her landlord. Rent due or you're out. Final notice. She looked at the cracked window in her living room, the broken heater, the fridge that groaned louder than the TV. Then she looked back at the note. That afternoon she called Daniel. He picked her up in the SUV at 4 p.m. sharp. This time Emma was in the back seat. Tasha smiled and waved gently. Hey there, princess. Emma looked at her for a long moment, then gave a tiny smile. Tasha's chest swelled. As they drove, Daniel explained things. Emma had been diagnosed with Aicardi syndrome, a rare disorder that affected her muscles and nervous system. She couldn't walk and her speech was limited. But her mind was bright. She understood more than she could express. She loved music, Daniel said, before the seizures got worse. Her mother used to sing to her every night. Tasha nodded. Maybe we can play some music again. Gently. Daniel glanced at her. That would mean the world. As they pulled into the long private driveway, Tasha's jaw dropped. His home was more like a mansion. Huge windows, stone walls, a garden with fountains and rose bushes. It looked like something out of a movie. Daniel showed her inside. The foyer had a chandelier bigger than her bedroom, floors you could eat off, and stairs that split in two directions like a castle. Emma's room was on the ground floor, bright and cozy, with butterflies painted on the walls, and a hospital-grade bed beside a regular twin-sized one with pink pillows. This is where you'd stay, if you take the job, Daniel said, pointing to the guest suite next door. Or at least when you're on shift. You'll have your own space. Tasha nodded, wide-eyed. That night, Tasha stayed for dinner. Daniel's personal chef cooked a full meal, but Emma refused to eat again, until Tasha sat beside her. She didn't say anything. She just smiled, picked up a spoon, and waited. Emma leaned forward and took a bite. Daniel watched silently from across the table, his throat tight. I don't know what it is about you, he said, but you've already done more for her than anyone else. Tasha smiled. I just treat her like a kid, not a patient. Later, as she stood by the large window in her guest suite, looking out at the starlit garden, she whispered to herself, is this real? She didn't know then that the real test hadn't even begun. The next morning, Tasha was woken up early by a loud noise. A crash. Something heavy falling. She sat up, heart racing. Then she heard it. A voice crying out from down the hall. Emma. Tasha ran barefoot across the cold floor, bursting into Emma's room. And what she saw made her heart stop. Emma's bed was empty. The wheelchair tipped over. And Emma, was lying face down on the floor, motionless. Tasha screamed, "Daniel!" And as he came running down the hall, fear painted across his face. Both of them realized something terrifying. Emma had never gotten out of bed on her own before. What had happened? How did she fall? Or worse, was someone else in the house? Daniel burst into the room just as Tasha was dropping to her knees beside Emma's tiny, crumpled body. "Emma!" he shouted, panic thick in his voice. "Oh God, Emma!" Tasha was already checking her breathing. "She's alive," she said quickly, trying to keep her voice calm, even as her hands trembled. "But we need to get her checked. Now." Emma's eyes were open but glassy. Her small lips were moving, but no sound came out. Her fingers twitched against the carpet. Daniel scooped her up into his arms with practiced strength, his face pale. "I'll get the car. Call the hospital," he ordered, already halfway to the front door. Tasha's fingers fumbled across the sleek marble counter for the house phone. "Where's the number?" she muttered. Just then, a man in a suit, Daniel's house manager, Todd, stepped into the foyer, startled by the shouting. "What's going on?" "She fell. Emma fell," Tasha cried. "Call the hospital." Todd didn't waste a second. Tasha followed Daniel outside, where the SUV was already humming. He cradled Emma in the back seat while Tasha climbed in beside them. Emma's breathing was shallow, but her eyes fluttered toward Tasha. Tasha grabbed her small hand. "You're okay, sweetheart. I'm here. We're here." As the SUV sped through the city, Daniel's jaw was clenched. How did this happen? She's never tried to get up on her own before. There were rails on the bed. Tasha remembered seeing the rails the night before. She'd helped tuck Emma in, adjusted her pillow. Everything had been secure. Her stomach dropped. Unless someone lowered them? "Do you have security cameras in the hall?" she asked quietly. Daniel blinked, eyes narrowing. "Yes." "Why?" "Check them when we get back." His eyes met hers, sharp and serious. "You think someone?" Tasha didn't say it out loud, but she thought it. What if this wasn't an accident? Hours later, after tests, scans, and too many medical terms for one day, the doctor came into the hospital room with a small smile. "No broken bones. No head trauma. Just a few bruises. She's very lucky." Daniel slumped in relief. Emma was resting, an oxygen tube in her nose. Her tiny body looked even smaller against the white sheets. Tasha hadn't left her side. When the doctor left, Daniel walked over, pulling up a chair. "She wouldn't let go of your hand when they were checking her. She doesn't even do that with me." Tasha brushed a curl from Emma's forehead. "She's stronger than she looks." Daniel's eyes flicked to the door. "I checked the cameras," he said. "From last night." Tasha looked up, tense. "There's a gap," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, from 2:03 a.m. to 2:27 a.m., the feed cuts out. Just static." Tasha's heart skipped. "Some kind of power issue?" "No. The rest of the cameras were fine. Just the ones near Emma's room." A chill ran down Tasha's spine. Daniel leaned in, voice low. "I hired people I thought I could trust. But now," his jaw tightened, "I'm increasing security. No one gets near Emma unless I say so. And from now on, you're not just here to care for her. You're here to protect her." Tasha stared at him, unsure if he was serious. But his face told her he absolutely was. "You trust me with that?" Daniel nodded. "I do." Then his voice cracked. "Because I don't know who else I can trust." The next few days were quiet, but tense. Back at the mansion, a new security team was brought in. Daniel installed extra locks on Emma's room, even a motion sensor near the bed. Tasha had access to everything now, codes, keys, and even her own security badge. But something still felt off. One night, while Tasha was reading beside Emma's bed, she noticed something strange. A stuffed bear that had been on the window ledge was now lying on the floor. She stood up, slowly, and crossed the room. Emma was asleep. The windows were locked. The cameras were blinking green. She picked up the bear, frowning. Then she noticed it wasn't Emma's. This bear was old. The button eyes were scratched, and the tag on its foot had initials stitched into it. LW. Not Emma's. Not Daniel's. Someone else's. Tasha turned it over and froze. Inside the bear's back was a small slit, hidden beneath the stitching, like something had been put inside it. She took a step back. Her breath caught in her throat. Just then, a sharp knock came at the door. Tasha nearly jumped out of her skin. She tucked the bear behind her, heart pounding. "Come in," she called, voice steady. Todd entered, clipboard in hand. "Just doing checks," he said. "Everything all right?" "Fine," she said quickly. He scanned the room with those quiet eyes of his, then smiled politely. "You're doing a good job, Tasha." She nodded. "Thanks." But something in his tone felt off. Too polite. Too practiced. When he left, Tasha locked the door, then pulled out the bear again. She didn't know what was inside it yet, but she had a bad feeling. And she was right, because later that night, when everyone was asleep and the house was still, she carefully cut open the slit in the back of the bear, and what fell out onto her lap made her gasp. It was a tiny voice recorder, still running, still blinking red. Someone had been recording Emma, inside her own room, and they had been doing it for days. Tasha stared at it, horrified. Then she looked at the door, because somewhere in that house, someone had planted it, and whoever it was, they knew she had just found it. Tasha's hands trembled as she stared at the tiny voice recorder blinking in her lap. It felt like poison in her hands. Cold. Wrong. Invasive. She looked over at Emma, still sleeping peacefully in the bed beside her, completely unaware. The idea that someone had been secretly listening to a disabled child, alone in her room, made Tasha's stomach turn. She wrapped the recorder in a towel and slipped it into the deep pocket of her hoodie. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure it would wake Emma. She stood slowly, trying to steady her breathing. Every creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet sent chills down her spine. Who had planted it? Todd? One of the nurses? Someone from Daniel's old staff? Or someone even closer? She quietly stepped into the hallway, careful not to make a sound. The house was eerily still. No wind, no footsteps, just the low hum of the security system. She didn't want to wake Daniel. Not until she was sure. Not until she had something more than just a hunch and a sick feeling in her gut. She needed help. Not just from anyone. From someone who wouldn't run to Daniel or the house staff. Someone outside the mansion. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. Tasha hesitated, then picked up. "Hello." Silence. Then a low voice whispered, "You need to stop asking questions." She froze. "What?" "Walk away, Tasha, before someone gets hurt." Click. The call ended. Her entire body went cold. Who was that? How did they have her number? Her breaths came faster now. She backed into Emma's room and locked the door behind her. Then she shut the curtains and moved to the corner, where she sat on the floor, holding the recorder tight in her hand. She didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. The next morning, Daniel noticed. He walked into Emma's room and found Tasha sitting in the armchair with the same clothes from the night before, dark circles under her eyes. "You didn't sleep," he said, kneeling beside the chair. Tasha shook her head. "I found something." She reached into her pocket and handed him the towel-wrapped bundle. He opened it slowly, eyebrows drawing together. When he saw the recorder, his eyes widened. "What the hell is this?" "I found it stuffed inside a teddy bear," she said quietly. "Not one of Emma's. It was in the room. Someone's been listening." Daniel stood up fast, clutching the device like it was toxic. This was in her room?" Tasha nodded. "And it wasn't the only weird thing. The cameras near her door went out the night she fell. You said it was only that hallway. That's not a glitch. That's someone doing it on purpose." Daniel's jaw clenched. "I'm calling the police." "No," Tasha said suddenly. He turned sharply. "Excuse me?" "Not yet," she said, standing to face him. "Whoever did this is smart. You go public right now, they'll run, or worse, they'll cover their tracks. We need to catch them first. Get proof." Daniel stared at her, eyes full of fury and fear. Then finally he nodded. All right, then we do this quietly. Together. He turned to Emma, still sleeping peacefully. No one touches her without our say-so. Not even Todd. From now on, you and I are the only people who go near her. Agreed. Agreed, Tasha said. He looked back at her. Thank you, he said, voice low, for not running. Tasha met his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. That day, Daniel had all the staff gathered in the kitchen for a routine security check meeting. Tasha stood in the hall, pretending to wipe down picture frames, listening carefully. Todd spoke first. I've already spoken with the security company. They're sending in a tech team to check the wiring. But as far as I can tell, no signs of tampering. Tasha rolled her eyes. Liar. Another woman, the housekeeper, chimed in. We've had no strangers enter. Cameras show nothing out of the ordinary. Daniel nodded along, then casually said, I'll be reviewing footage myself. All of it. From the past 2 weeks. Todd hesitated, then forced a smile. Of course, sir. I'll have it prepared. Tasha caught it. The slight twitch in Todd's cheek. The stiffness in his shoulders. He was hiding something. Later that afternoon, while Daniel reviewed the camera logs, Tasha made her way to the basement office, where Todd kept his private desk. She knew it was risky, but she had to know. She slipped inside quietly, closing the door behind her. The office was small, wood-paneled, and spotless. Not a paper out of place. But there was a locked drawer in the desk. She dropped to her knees and pulled a bobby pin from her hair. She wasn't proud of how quickly she picked the lock. Years of growing up in the foster system had taught her a few tricks. The drawer popped open. Inside was a flash drive, unlabeled, and beneath it, a small photo of Daniel's late wife. Only she wasn't alone. She was standing beside Todd, arm around his waist, laughing. Tasha felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Why would Todd have that? Just then, footsteps in the hall. Tasha slammed the drawer shut and dove behind the desk, heart racing. The door creaked open. Todd stepped inside. He stood still for a moment, then slowly walked to the desk. Tasha held her breath, curled tight behind the chair, praying he wouldn't notice the drawer was unlocked. He sat down, booted up the computer, and mumbled to himself. Just a few more days. Then it's done. Tasha's eyes widened. He clicked through some folders on the screen, folders labeled with dates and locations. One file caught her eye. Video, Walker Estate, Emma_Sam_06. She felt sick. She had to get out, fast. But the moment she moved, her elbow bumped the underside of the desk. Just slightly. Thud. Todd's head snapped around. He stood up slowly. Who's there? Tasha held her breath. But it was no use. Todd grabbed the edge of the desk and yanked the chair aside. His eyes locked with hers. For a long second, they both froze. Then, Todd lunged. Tasha screamed, dodging to the side and running for the door. He grabbed her hoodie, yanking her back. She slammed her elbow into his ribs and kicked his shin. He stumbled, swearing, but not down. She flung the door open and ran. Tasha! He shouted behind her, thundering after her. She sprinted up the stairs, down the hall, and around the corner, straight into Daniel. What's going on? He barked, grabbing her shoulders. Todd, he's hiding something. He has video files, and a photo of your wife. With him. Daniel's face drained of color. Behind them, Todd stopped at the end of the hall, breathing hard. Tasha's lying, he said, his voice calm but strained. She broke into my office. She's trying to frame me. Daniel stepped between them. Back. Off. Todd raised his hands slowly. You think I'd hurt your daughter? After all these years. I don't know what to think, Daniel growled. I do, Tasha said. He's not who he says he is. Todd's eyes flicked to her, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, empty. You think you're saving her, he said, his voice low. But you're just in the way. And before anyone could speak, the lights went out. All of them. Every single one in the house. Plunging them into pitch-black silence. Darkness swallowed the hallway. It wasn't just a flicker. It was complete. Blacker than midnight. Not even the moonlight slipping through the mansion windows. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. "Emma!" she gasped, turning toward her room. Daniel grabbed her wrist. "Stay behind me." A second later, a sickening thud echoed in the dark. Tasha screamed. Daniel grunted and staggered sideways. "Todd!" he shouted. No answer. Just the creak of fast footsteps vanishing down the hallway, and the soft, electric hum of emergency backup lights flickering on. Dim, red glow bathed the walls like blood. Tasha could now see Daniel leaning against the wall, a dark streak down his temple. He'd been hit. "I'm okay," he said, though his voice was shaky. "Go check on Emma." Tasha didn't wait. She sprinted down the hall, barefoot, heart hammering, adrenaline burning in her veins. Emma's door was locked. She fumbled with the key card Daniel had given her. Swipe. Nothing. Swipe again. Click. She burst inside. Emma was still in bed, but sitting up now, frightened, her little hands gripping the covers. "It's okay, baby girl. I'm here," Tasha said, rushing to her side. She scooped her up into her arms, holding her close. Emma buried her face into Tasha's neck, trembling. Then Tasha noticed it. The window. It was open, but not broken, unlocked. No wind had caused that. Someone had tried to get in, or worse, was planning to take her. Tasha quickly shut the window, locked it, and pulled the curtains tight. She checked the cameras, dead. Blinking red lights. Disabled. A sick knot formed in her stomach. Todd had planned this. He wanted the power out. He wanted them blind. But why? Why now? And how far was he willing to go? Just then, Daniel appeared in the doorway, one hand pressed to his temple, eyes bloodshot with fury. "I checked the fuse room. Manual override. Someone cut the breakers." He took a step forward, eyes landing on Emma. His face softened, but only for a second. Then he turned to Tasha. "I want him found. Now." By morning, the police had arrived. Todd was gone. No trace. No car. No calls. No goodbye. Just vanished like smoke. Daniel gave them everything, the voice recorder, the camera logs, even the flash drive Tasha had snuck from the office. Inside it were hundreds of hours of video. Emma's room. Her therapy sessions. Even private conversations Daniel had taken in his study. All secretly recorded. And then the deeper they dug, the more they found. Bank statements. Large deposits from offshore accounts in Todd's name. Messages from an encrypted server. Names of companies Daniel was bidding against in upcoming tech deals. That's when it clicked. "He wasn't trying to hurt Emma," Tasha said quietly. "She was just the way in." Daniel nodded, jaw clenched. "He used her to spy on me for months, maybe years." The betrayal in his eyes was hard to look at. "Why didn't I see it?" he whispered. Tasha touched his arm gently. "Because you trusted him." Daniel looked at her. "You were the only one who noticed. The only one who didn't ignore the signs." He took a breath. "I don't want you here part-time anymore. I want you with us. Always." Tasha blinked. "You mean?" "Full-time caregiver. And head of Emma's personal security. I'll pay you triple what you're making now. You'll have full access. A say in every decision." Tasha looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep holding her hand. Her heart filled with something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Family. But before she could answer, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it, eyes narrowing. Then his face went pale. He turned the screen toward her. It was a picture of them, standing in the hallway, from last night. The timestamp was 11:42 p.m., when the power had gone out. The angle of the photo, taken from inside the house. There was someone else, still in the mansion, watching and waiting. Daniel's fingers tightened around the phone, his knuckles white. Tasha stared at the screen, her stomach twisting into a knot. The photo was too clear, taken from above, likely from a corner security camera. But all the cameras had gone dark last night. Or at least they thought they had. That meant only one thing. Whoever sent that photo had access to the system. Not Todd. Someone else. Still here. Still watching. I thought we shut everything down, Daniel muttered. We did, Tasha whispered. At least the official system. But what if someone installed a second one? Something secret. Off-grid. Daniel looked at her. Who would do that? Someone who's been in the house long enough to know where the blind spots are. Daniel's eyes went wide. He turned and left the room, marching down the hallway like a man on a mission. Tasha followed closely behind, heart hammering in her chest. Emma was in the care of a trusted nurse Daniel had called in from a private hospital just hours ago. The house was under police surveillance, but still, Daniel moved with urgency, as if he didn't trust anyone. He led her to the east wing, a part of the house she hadn't even explored yet. It was quieter here, colder, and somehow older. The walls were lined with paintings from a different time. The carpet didn't match the rest of the modern mansion. The doors creaked. He stopped in front of a narrow wooden door tucked behind a hallway bookshelf. This was the original study, before I renovated, he said. No one uses it anymore. He opened it with a small brass key. Inside, dust floated in the air like ghosts. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books and old files. A large desk stood in the center, with a green banker's lamp casting a faint glow. But it was what was behind the desk that caught Tasha's eye. Panel in the wall, just slightly ajar. Daniel reached forward, tugged it open, and behind it, a hidden surveillance room. Tasha gasped. A dozen small monitors flickered on. All black and white, all grainy, but clearly active. Cameras were live. Bedrooms, hallways, even the garden, even Emma's room. Oh my God, Tasha breathed. How long has this been here? Daniel looked stunned. I didn't build this. There was a red blinking light in the corner, recording. Tasha picked up one of the monitors, flipping it around. On the back was a small sticker. LW Security Install Date, May 2017. Tasha blinked. Wait, LW, like the initials on the teddy bear. Daniel's brow furrowed. My wife's name was Lauren West. They both froze. Suddenly, the picture was becoming clearer, but more confusing at the same time. Are you saying Lauren built this? Tasha asked, voice soft. Daniel didn't answer right away. She was paranoid before she died, he said finally. Always worried people were after us. I thought it was the stress, the diagnosis, the therapy appointments. But maybe. He trailed off. Tasha stepped closer to one of the monitors. One screen had a folder icon blinking on it, connected to an old desktop computer hidden beneath the desk. She clicked. Dozens of video files appeared, all labeled with names. Todd, January 2020. Housekeeper, November 2021. Daniel, July 2022. And at the bottom, Tasha, yesterday. Tasha's heart jumped. She clicked it. A video began to play. Grainy footage from the hallway camera last night. It showed Tasha and Daniel talking. The same exact image that had been sent to his phone. She looked over her shoulder at Daniel. This system is still active. Someone's still using it. But they wanted us to know they're watching now. He nodded grimly. It's not about spying anymore. It's a message. Tasha scrolled back to a video marked Todd, March 2023. She played it, and her breath caught. It showed Todd, sitting at the old study desk, talking on the phone. We've got everything. Just need a few more recordings. She's the key. If we can break the dad, the investors will walk. Stock drops and you move in. We all win. Then, yeah, the girl's harmless. Practically furniture. Tasha's blood boiled. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He was selling us out. But who was he talking to? She asked. That's when another realization hit her. She looked up at Daniel. The footage, your wife set this up. She was trying to protect you. She must have known something was going on. Daniel's face went pale. And just then, one of the monitors flickered. New footage. A live feed. Someone walking down the garden path outside the window. Tasha squinted. A man in a gray hoodie, face hidden, but heading directly for the back entrance. Daniel leapt into motion. I'm calling security. Stay here. But Tasha grabbed his arm. No. I'm coming with you. They rushed out the back door, hearts pounding. The garden was quiet, too quiet. Wind whispered through the hedges. The air was cold and sharp. Then a rustle. They turned. A figure ducked into the old tool shed at the edge of the property. Daniel reached for the gun inside his coat, something he'd started carrying after the incident with Emma. He motioned for Tasha to stay low. They approached slowly, step by step. The shed door creaked open slightly. Daniel raised his weapon. Step out. Now. Silence. Then slowly, a man stepped out, but not the one they expected. He was older, graying, wrinkles around his eyes, and a familiar sadness behind them. Tasha gasped. It was the man from the photo. Lauren's photo. Beside her. The one in Todd's drawer. Daniel's face went white. Richard. Tasha looked between them, stunned. You know him? Daniel's voice was flat. That's Lauren's brother. Emma's uncle. Richard raised his hands. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Daniel didn't lower the gun. Then why are you sneaking around our property at midnight? I didn't know who to trust, Richard said, his voice cracking. Not after what happened to Lauren. Daniel's hands trembled slightly. You think I don't still have nightmares about that night? Richard continued. I warned her. I told her someone was watching us. But she thought I was paranoid. He looked straight at Tasha. But I didn't disappear. I kept digging. Tasha stepped forward. Digging for what? Richard reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside photos, bank documents, names, maps, and one document at the top. Operation Willow Nest, Confidential, Blackthorn Holdings LLC. Tasha squinted. What is this? Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. It's the company that tried to buy out my firm last year. He looked at Richard. This goes all the way to them? Richard nodded. They paid Todd to spy, to break your business. They thought if Emma suffered, you'd fold. Daniel's hand dropped. The gun lowered to his side. He looked sick. Tasha stepped forward and picked up one of the photos. It was of Emma, in a hospital bed, dated 3 years ago, before Lauren's death, back when things first started falling apart, and scribbled on the back, in shaky handwriting. They're watching us. Don't let them near Emma. Lauren's voice, a warning from the grave. Tasha stared down at the words, and just then, her phone buzzed. A new message, a video file. She clicked it. It showed a live feed of Emma's room, and a shadow moving toward her bed. Slowly, carefully, someone was already inside. Tasha's blood ran cold. The video played on her phone, grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. A shadow moved across the far wall of Emma's bedroom, creeping like smoke toward her bed. Whoever it was, they were careful, deliberate, dressed in all black with their face masked, hands gloved. No sound, no rush. They knew the cameras were watching and wanted them to. Daniel looked over Tasha's shoulder and blanched. She's in there, right now. Tasha didn't wait for orders. She spun on her heels and sprinted toward the house like a bullet. The envelope of damning documents clutched tight in one hand. Her legs burned. Her lungs ached. But nothing mattered more than getting to that room before it was too late. Behind her, she could hear Daniel shouting for backup, calling out to the private guards posted near the front gates. The security detail they'd just installed yesterday after everything with Todd was still new, but it had to be enough. It had to. The mansion doors banged open. Tasha raced through the halls, barefoot again, barely feeling the tile floor beneath her feet. She hit Emma's hallway. Dim lights. No sound. Then, a click. Her heart stopped. Emma's door. Closing. Tasha threw herself forward, shoulder first. Bang. The door slammed open, crashing against the wall. Inside, the masked figure stood over Emma's bed, a syringe in hand. Tasha didn't think, she acted. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy crystal lamp, and hurled it. The lamp smashed into the intruder's shoulder with a crack, sending them staggering back. They dropped the syringe. Tasha lunged forward, shielding Emma with her body. "Get away from her!" she screamed. The intruder recovered fast, but footsteps thundered behind her. Daniel, now flanked by 2 guards. The figure turned and bolted toward the window. Glass shattered. They dove through, disappearing into the darkness. Daniel ran to the window, gun drawn, but the intruder was gone, melted into the trees at the edge of the estate. The guards took off after them. Tasha stayed kneeling beside Emma, checking her pulse, brushing her curls gently from her damp forehead. She was okay, still breathing, but pale, scared. She hadn't screamed, hadn't cried. She just watched, frozen. Daniel dropped beside them. "She okay?" Tasha nodded shakily. "I think so. They didn't get the needle in." He collapsed into a crouch, rubbing his face. "Why her?" he whispered. "Why keep going after her?" Tasha pulled the fallen syringe off the floor with a tissue. Inside, the fluid looked clear but deadly. She handed it to Daniel. This wasn't about leverage anymore. This was about erasing her. Daniel's eyes burned. Because she knows something, or someone thinks she does. He looked up at Tasha. "I want you with her. All night. Every night. You don't even have to ask," Tasha said. She picked Emma up gently, holding her close. "I've got her." Hours later, after the police finished sweeping the area and the guards expanded their perimeter, Daniel and Tasha stood in the surveillance room again, the hidden one Lauren had built. Richard was with them now, arms crossed, studying the wall of flickering screens. Tasha handed over the envelope he'd given her earlier, now spread out across the desk. Daniel picked through the files with shaking hands. "It was all in front of me. For years." "Not your fault," Richard said. "Lauren knew something was wrong. That's why she built this. She just never had time to finish." Tasha leaned against the desk. "Then we finish it." They both looked at her. "This house, this family, Emma, it's all been under attack because of your money, your company, and maybe something else we haven't even uncovered yet. But we're not going to play defense anymore." She looked Daniel dead in the eyes. "We find them, and we take them down." He nodded slowly. "You're not just her caregiver anymore, are you?" Tasha smiled. "Just a little." "Nope. I'm the one they should have been afraid of." The next morning, Tasha sat by Emma's bed, holding her hand gently. Emma was awake now, her eyes brighter, more focused. She looked up at Tasha and gave a small smile. "You're safe," Tasha whispered, brushing her curls back. "No one's gonna touch you again." Emma opened her mouth slowly, carefully, and for the first time, she spoke. "Mom." Tasha's eyes welled with tears. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I know, baby girl. I know you miss her." Daniel walked in just then, quietly, overhearing the single word. His lips parted. Tears filled his eyes, too. "She said that." Tasha nodded. Daniel walked over and dropped to his knees beside them. "She hasn't spoken a word since Lauren passed," he whispered. Tasha looked down at Emma. "Maybe she's been waiting for someone to listen." Daniel wiped his face, and just then the nurse walked in. "We just ran Emma's vitals. You're not going to believe this." They turned. "What is it?" Daniel asked. "Her neural scans are stabilizing. No new episodes. Her pressure is normalizing too. It's like something changed overnight." Tasha and Daniel exchanged a glance. Hope, that's what had changed. Love, safety, presence. And Emma felt it. But just as the nurse stepped out, Tasha's phone buzzed again. No number, no message, just an audio file. She clicked play. The voice was distorted but familiar, and the words made her blood run cold. "She's just the beginning. You don't know the real target yet. And by the time you do, it'll be too late." Silence. Then, another message. This one with a name attached. Blackthorn Holdings. And a time. 3 a.m. Tasha looked at the clock. It was already 2:41. She turned to Daniel, voice deadly calm. They're making their next move. He grabbed his coat. Then so are we. Tasha stood, heart steady. This ends tonight. 2:58 a.m. The mansion was silent. Even the wind outside had stilled, like the earth was holding its breath. Tasha stood in the darkened surveillance room, eyes fixed on the time glowing red on the computer screen. Daniel stood behind her, fully dressed in black. A sleek earpiece was tucked in his ear. The guards had been pulled in. Richard stood by the basement entrance, gripping a metal flashlight with white knuckles. And Emma, safe, finally sleeping, with 3 armed officers stationed outside her door. They had fortified every room, double-checked every camera, every alarm system, but they all felt the same thing in their bones. Something was coming. The message had been clear. Blackthorn Holdings was making their next move. At 3 a.m., and whatever it wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was bigger and bloodier. Tasha adjusted the hidden earpiece Daniel had given her. The new tech team had hardwired the mansion with private comms, silent alarms, and even motion sensors tied into Lauren's secret surveillance system. Tasha glanced at the monitors. All quiet, no movement. Yet, 2:59 a.m. 1 minute. Tasha tightened the grip on the flashlight baton in her hand. She wasn't armed, not legally, but she knew how to fight. And she knew what she was protecting. She wasn't just defending a child. She was defending a family, a second chance, everything she'd never had. She thought of Emma's voice that morning, that single, fragile word, Mom. It echoed in her heart like a war drum. Then the clock ticked forward, 3 a.m., and the power went out. Again. Only this time it wasn't the lights. It was everything. Monitors, alarms, backups, dead. The entire house went dark, colder than before. The kind of dark that doesn't just hide things, it devours them. Tasha's breath caught. Daniel? She whispered into her mic. Talk to me. No response. Just static. She clicked again. Richard? Anyone? Nothing. She grabbed a flashlight, clicked it on, and spun toward the basement door. It was wide open. She hadn't opened it. Had you? She took a step back, instincts flaring. Then a click behind her. She turned. Someone stood in the doorway of the surveillance room. Tall, masked, gloved. Again. But not Todd. This one was broader, silent, and carrying a long metal case. He stepped forward. Tasha raised the flashlight baton. You picked the wrong house. He didn't speak, just raised the case and opened it. Inside tools, wire cutters, a hard drive, USBs, and an envelope marked Project Nest. Final phase. Tasha's eyes darted to the envelope. She lunged. He moved faster. Tasha swung the flashlight baton hard, slamming it into his side. He grunted, staggered, but didn't fall. She ducked as he swiped at her, reaching for her arm. She jabbed the baton into his ribs again. This time he went down, but not for long. She grabbed the case and bolted down the hallway, racing toward Daniel's office. It was the only room with a lock that wasn't tied into the electronic system. She slammed the door shut behind her and twisted the manual bolt. Heart pounding, she dumped the contents of the case onto the floor. Dozens of files, flash drives, photos, and at the top, a blueprint of Daniel's company, his data servers, his private vaults, all marked with Blackthorn Holdings. But there was more. There were other names, other children, other CEOs. Tasha felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just about Daniel or Emma. This was a network, a quiet war, waged with silence and secrets. And Emma had been the leverage, because Lauren had discovered it first. Lauren had been trying to expose Blackthorn before her accident. She wasn't paranoid. She'd been hunted. A sound at the door snapped Tasha out of it. The knob jiggled. Once, twice, then silence. Then a voice. Low, chilling, familiar. You're clever. I'll give you that. It wasn't Todd. It wasn't the masked man. It was a woman. Tasha backed away from the door, trying to place it. You think you've uncovered something, the voice continued, but you've only peeled back the first layer. Tasha's hands were shaking now, but not with fear. With fury. She shouted through the door, "Who are you?" A pause. Then, "Let's just say, I worked with Lauren." Until she made the mistake of trying to play hero. Tasha's blood boiled. "You killed her." "I warned her," the voice said. "Just like I'm warning you." Suddenly, the door blew open. Smoke. Flash. Someone had used a small explosive charge. Tasha stumbled back, coughing, eyes burning. Through the haze, she saw her. A woman in her 40s, tall, sharp eyes, wearing a sleek black coat and gloves, holding a silenced pistol. And behind her, Daniel, on his knees, a bruise on his temple, blood on his lip, held at gunpoint by the masked man. Emma nowhere in sight. Tasha screamed, "You touch him, I swear." The woman raised a hand. "Shoo, you care about the child, yes? Good. Then you'll be smart." Daniel gritted his teeth. "Don't listen to her. She's Blackthorn." The woman smiled. "You think this is about business? No, this is about control. We offer freedom, power, and you were too soft to see it." She turned to Tasha. "You have one choice. Join us, or lose everything." Tasha didn't answer. Not with words. She leapt, knocked the pistol aside just as it fired. Pop! The masked man tried to grab her. Daniel swung an elbow, catching him off guard. Tasha tackled the woman to the ground. They fought hard, biting, clawing. Tasha grabbed a sharp letter opener from the desk and held it to the woman's throat. "Where is Emma?" she hissed. The woman laughed, even with a blade pressed to her skin. "She's gone." Daniel lunged toward the computer, brought the cameras back online. One screen lit up. Emma's room, still locked, still safe. Then, another screen, live feed, a van, pulling out of the back gate. Inside, security guards, but not their guards. Tasha's heart stopped. "She's in there," she whispered. Daniel turned to her, eyes wild. "Can you stop them?" Tasha stood up, grabbed the woman's gun, and chambered around. "I'm gonna do more than that." She turned to the woman on the ground. "Tell them to stop the van." The woman smirked. Then, "You're already too late." Tasha ran, sprinting back through the house. Daniel on her heels. As they burst outside, headlights disappeared down the long winding road. Tasha raised the gun, fired 2 warning shots in the air. The van didn't stop. She ran faster, feet slamming against gravel. And just as the van turned the corner, a black SUV swerved in from the opposite direction. Boom! Metal crunched. Tires exploded. The van flipped onto its side, glass shattering in every direction. Daniel stopped, eyes wide. Richard stepped out of the SUV, smoke curling from the engine. "Did I make it in time?" he asked. Tasha sprinted to the wreckage. The back doors of the van burst open, and inside, amidst chaos and blood and groaning men, was Emma, still strapped in, still alive. She reached out toward Tasha and whispered the second word she'd spoken in 2 years. "Home." Tasha grabbed her, holding her tight, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now, baby girl. I've got you." But as sirens approached in the distance, Tasha knew one thing. This wasn't over. Because Blackthorn Holdings wasn't just a threat. It was an empire. And taking them down would require everything she had. But looking down at Emma, Tasha knew one thing for sure. She was ready. Morning broke through the trees like a spotlight on a new stage, golden and quiet. But the mansion behind them looked like the end of a war zone. Smoke still curled from the wrecked van. Police cruisers and black government SUVs lined the drive. Agents in dark jackets moved like shadows across the estate, interviewing witnesses, sweeping rooms, collecting shattered pieces of something far bigger than just one night. Tasha sat on the front steps, Emma wrapped in her arms like a warm bundle of hope. The child hadn't let go since they'd pulled her from the van. And Tasha hadn't let go either. Not once. Daniel stood just behind them, bruised, exhausted, but alive. He hadn't slept. None of them had. Not after what had happened. But the storm had passed. For now. And what came next would be even bigger, because now they were going after Blackthorn. Officially, by mid-morning, federal agents from Homeland Security had set up a command post in the east wing of the mansion. It turned out Blackthorn Holdings wasn't just targeting Daniel's empire. They'd been orchestrating silent takeovers across the country, manipulating companies, threatening families, and using children like Emma as pressure points to force powerful people to kneel. And Lauren? She had gotten too close, and they had silenced her. Until now, the information Richard had been collecting for years, alongside Lauren's hidden surveillance data, the USB drives from Todd's office, and the files from the briefcase Tasha had ripped from the intruder, formed the largest domestic espionage case the agency had seen in a decade. "You cracked it wide open," one of the agents told Tasha, looking at her like she was someone else entirely. "How'd you even catch the first thread?" Tasha shrugged, glancing at Emma. "I saw a hungry kid. That was enough." He nodded, jaw tight. "We're gonna need you. All of you. If you're willing." Daniel stepped in. "She's not just willing. She's leading the charge." Later that day, Daniel and Tasha stood outside on the veranda. The air was crisp, birds cautiously returning to the garden. A little peace was settling in. "You could walk away now," Daniel said quietly. "You've already done more than anyone asked for. More than I deserved." Tasha looked at him, eyes steady. "I'm not walking away from Emma." A pause. Daniel smiled softly. "I didn't think you would." They sat together in silence for a moment, watching Emma in her wheelchair just a few feet away, giggling as Richard pushed her slowly through the garden path like she was riding a parade float. She looked happy, really happy. "I've been thinking about something," Daniel said. Tasha raised an eyebrow. "You once asked me what the catch was when I offered you the job." She nodded. "Yeah, still waiting on that answer." He laughed. It was tired but real. "There is no catch. There's only one thing I'd ask." He turned to face her. "Don't leave us." Tasha blinked. "I'm not talking about just work," he added, voice lower now. "I'm talking about us. Me, Emma, you." Her breath caught. "I know it's fast," he continued, "and you don't owe me anything. But this house, our lives, they were empty before you. You didn't just protect Emma. You brought her back. You brought me back." Tasha's voice was quiet. "You think you're in love with me?" Daniel met her gaze, steady. "I know I'm in love with you." Silence hung between them, stretched thin by years of pain, layers of grief, and a quiet hope neither of them had dared to speak until now. Then Tasha reached for his hand. She held it, firm. "Sure. I'm not going anywhere." That night, the house felt different. No more shadows. No more secrets. Just light. Emma fell asleep listening to soft music, something she hadn't done since her mother passed. Tasha had discovered an old playlist Lauren used to play, stored in the archives of the surveillance room. She found it by accident. Or maybe not. Maybe Lauren had left it for her. Daniel tucked Emma in while Tasha watched from the doorway. They exchanged a smile. This was what peace looked like. But just as they stepped into the hallway, a quiet knock echoed from the front door. Daniel's brow furrowed. "Another agent?" "I'll check," Tasha said. She made her way to the door, footsteps soft on the marble tile. When she opened it, there was no one there, just a small brown envelope sitting on the front step. She picked it up slowly. Inside, a single photograph. A child. No name, no age. Just a child strapped to a hospital bed, eyes terrified. The photo looked recent. On the back, written in shaky red ink, "There are more like Emma. If you really want to finish this, come find us." Tasha turned toward the hallway, envelope clutched to her chest. The storm wasn't over. It had just changed zip codes. But now, she wasn't alone. She had Daniel. She had Emma. And she had a new purpose. Not just to save one child, but all of them. She turned off the porch light, stepped back inside, and locked the door behind her. Tomorrow, they'd hunt down the rest of Blackthorn. Tonight, she'd sleep beside the child who gave her life meaning, and the man who gave her a reason to fight again. Because this story didn't start in a courtroom or a boardroom. It started in a diner, with a plate of mashed potatoes, and a single act of kindness. One woman, one child, and a future worth protecting. Forever. The warm scent of pancakes and maple syrup drifted through the air, mixing with laughter and the faint hum of morning birdsong. Sunlight poured into the kitchen through tall windows, bathing the marble counters and hardwood floors in a soft golden glow. Tasha stood at the stove, flipping pancakes in a borrowed, oversized hoodie. Daniel was barefoot, reading the news on his tablet, sipping coffee, the sleeves of his sweater rolled up, his hair a little messy. He looked nothing like the polished billionaire who'd walked into that dusty diner weeks ago. He looked like a dad. He looked happy. And Emma was sitting at the kitchen island, legs dangling, wearing a bright yellow dress, her curls pulled into a puffy bun. A new sparkle danced in her eyes. Her wheelchair sat unused by the wall. That's right, unused. She had taken 5 steps yesterday. Real steps. With help, yes, but on her own. The doctors called it miraculous. Said the progress she was making was years ahead of what they expected. But Tasha knew. It wasn't just medicine. It was love. It was security. It was someone finally fighting for Emma's joy, not just her survival. More pancakes? Tasha asked, flipping another golden circle onto a plate. Emma raised both hands with a big grin. Daniel chuckled. That's a yes. As Tasha set the plate in front of Emma, the little girl reached up and hugged her around the waist, burying her face against Tasha's stomach. I love you, she whispered. Tasha froze and slowly dropped to her knees, eyes full of tears. I love you too, baby girl. Daniel turned away, brushing his face. Don't mind me, just allergies. They all laughed, and for a moment the world was perfect. But the envelope on Daniel's desk still sat unopened. The photo of the unknown child still haunted their thoughts. They hadn't forgotten. That same afternoon, agents returned to finish the official report on Blackthorn Holdings. The mansion was buzzing again with whispers, briefcases, laptops, and printed files. Names were being crossed off. Warrants being drafted. The task force was growing. Tasha had been offered a formal role, liaison and lead investigator for the children affected by Blackthorn's operations. She hadn't hesitated. I want to go after them all, she said. Every last one. Richard stepped beside her, folding his arms. You're going to need a team, she grinned. Good thing I know a few people who don't like bullies. One of the agents pulled her aside and handed her a small file. Another child surfaced this morning, he said. Same signs, same silence. Hospital flagged it when they saw the pattern we released yesterday. Tasha opened the folder. A boy this time, 7 years old. Abandoned by his legal guardian, diagnosed with a rare neurodegenerative disorder, but no medical history, no relatives, and worse, he'd been adopted by one of Blackthorn's shell companies. He was a target. Tasha looked up, her jaw tight. Where is he? Connecticut Children's Hospital. Room 409. Waiting. 2 days later, Tasha walked into that hospital room with Daniel by her side. The boy sat curled up in bed, hands gripping a stuffed giraffe. When he looked up, his eyes were big and scared, but full of a question. Can I trust you? Tasha sat beside him, careful and slow. She didn't say much, just offered him a smile, a juice box, and a simple promise. You're safe now. He didn't say anything, but he leaned against her shoulder and didn't move. Daniel stood by the door, watching. This was the real work, the quiet kind. The kind that didn't make headlines but saved lives. One child at a time. Weeks passed, then months. Tasha's name began circulating quietly in protective circles, among doctors, nurses, social workers. She became the person people called when no one else would listen. She didn't care about recognition. She cared about the children. Daniel supported her every step of the way, turning parts of his business empire into a foundation dedicated to recovering and rehabilitating children used as leverage by criminal networks. He stepped away from the boardroom and leaned into fatherhood. And Emma? Emma danced. She laughed. She painted. She started physical therapy and even enrolled in a small, inclusive school where she had friends. Real ones. Her favorites were a girl named Lily and a boy who couldn't walk but taught her how to use a joystick wheelchair better than anyone. She smiled every single day. The wheelchair stayed nearby, but was needed less and less. And every night before bed, she asked Tasha to sing to her. Not a lullaby, but an Aretha Franklin song Tasha had once hummed while feeding her at the diner. You make me feel like a natural woman. Tasha didn't always hit the notes. But Emma didn't care. Because to her, Tasha wasn't just a caregiver. She was mom. And one quiet Saturday morning, in the backyard under the shade of a tree, Daniel knelt down beside Tasha with a small box in his hand. His voice shook. I lost Lauren. I thought I'd never have a family again. Then I walked into a diner and watched a woman feed my daughter with more love than I'd seen in years. He opened the box. A ring. Elegant. Simple. Perfect. I don't want to live another day without you. Tasha stared at him, tears already falling. Behind them, Emma giggled. Say yes, Mommy. Tasha laughed through her tears. Yes. The backyard erupted in cheers. Emma, Richard, even the cook from the diner, who had flown in for the celebration. They all clapped. They all cried. Because love had won. And not just any love, but the kind built in the cracks of brokenness, forged in fire, and sealed in the quiet moments of feeding a child, protecting the innocent, and choosing each other day after day. So yes, a millionaire single dad walked into a diner and watched a waitress feed his disabled daughter. And yes, that moment changed her life forever. But the truth is, it changed all of theirs. Forever.